Hello, I'm Tiffany, creator of Red Petal Patterns, and this is Intermediate Basics for Knitters. Today we're going to talk about cables, and I'm sure you've seen cables and probably passed up on patterns that contain them because you were afraid of them. They look intimidating, all of those cables and ropes and twisting and going every which direction, and it's very intimidating to think about doing them. But I'm hoping to break it down for you today so that it makes sense to you and you will no longer be afraid of them. So this is a sample of cables, and there are actually two cable cords working together to create a design. So there's actually a cable here and a cable here, and they twist here, and then they start over here and twist again, and then they go back out, and then they go back in, and then another one comes out and goes in, and then they go back out again. And this was created with two cables side by side. Almost any combination of cables that you can find is going to be more than one. If you just have one cable, it's either going to be a rope that twists like this or this, and it looks like S's or a chain going up, or it will zigzag. It'll just make a vine going up. Anything else is going to create these X's and O's and horseshoes and diamonds. You've probably seen them as owls. You can do a lot of things with them along with the textures. So I'm going to break this down for you and show you exactly what a cable is so that you will be able to recreate it. First of all, what you need. I am very sorry, we're going to have to deal with a drawing of what you need instead of what you actually need, because I do not actually use cable jumps. That's what I was taught to call them. I'm not sure what they're actually called other than maybe cable needles, but I was raised calling them cable jumps. And so that's what I'm going to call them because I'm going to forget and use that word anyway. When you get cable jumps, they're going to be three basic designs. You're going to find one is called a J type, and it will look something like this, and you will have a point here and a point here. And when I say a point, it'll be a point kind of like what's on the end of your knitting needle. It'll be the same kind of point, but it will be in a J. It may even be in a fancy J that looks like that. Serves the same purpose. You also have U-bend, which will be some form of this, and it will have a knitting needle point on both ends and a dip in the middle. And the last kind will look just like a double point needle, except it will have grooves in it all the way around, and that is so that it can't slip out. It will grip the yarn. You're not actually supposed to use that for knitting. That would be too difficult to go over those grooves. These are to serve the purpose of holding stitches out of the way. This will make sense in just a moment. Now, once you get really good at this, or you're working with certain yarns or certain patterns, you actually don't even need a cable jump anymore. But if you do, I usually use a short double point needle. Alternatively, if you use interchangeable circular needles, you can take one end off and use that. You want it to be at least the same size as the needle you're using, maybe even one size larger or one size smaller. Ideally, you don't want to use anything too small because you could end up not being able to get your needle back in there if you use something too small, or it could fall out because it's too small for the yarn you're using. If you're using something that's too large, you won't be able to slip it into those stitches. So what is a cable? A cable is knitting your stitches out of order. And what I mean is, let's say you have 6 stitches. This is literally the way I do my cables when I'm trying to figure out what I want to write, a cable front or a cable back. I do this to make up my mind which way they need to be done. So you have these 6 stitches. You're going to take the first 3 and knit them out of order with the next 3. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to take 3 of them off your needle and either put them on, you're going to put them on a cable jump, and you're either going to put them in the back of your work or in the front of your work. And if you put them in the front of your work and then you knit these, and then you're going to go back and knit these off of your cable jump, and then you're going to continue across your row. And you can see I'm going to use 2 fingers since I've got chunky fingers. That'll be easier for you to see. So if I take these off and hold them to the front, work these 2, and then go back and work these 2, you can see that I've held it to the front and my cable's going to lean to the left. If I do the same thing and I hold them to the back, then I knit these, then I knit these, I've held it to the back and my cable's going to lean to the right. That is it. That is all a cable is. You can do it with 6 stitches, you can do it with 2 stitches. If you do it with 1 stitch, it tends to be called a twisted stitch, which I don't think is quite fair. That's a 2-stitch cable. If you call it a twisted stitch, that could get confused with actual twisted stitches, which is different. But you can do it that way. You can do it with 1 and 2. You can do it with 3 and 3, 4 and 4, which that's getting, you're probably not going to run against a 4 and 4 unless you're doing a really big pattern that those end up splitting off into something else later. Very complicated pattern. But you're probably going to run into 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3. Or an uneven amount like 1 and 2 or 2 and 3. And in a second, I'm going to show you why that is. So, when you're working, when you're looking at a pattern and the way it's written, I told you that when you hold your yarn in the back, it's going to lean to the right. And if you hold it in the front, it's going to lean to the left. These mean the same thing. So a cable is normally going to be written cable, let's say cable 3 back, cable 3 right, or cable 3 front, cable 3 left. Or the same exact cable could be written as cable 6 back, cable 6 right, cable 6 front, cable 6 left. Okay, now depending on who's writing it and how they learned cables, these same 6 stitches could be referred to as cable 3 back, which means you're gonna make a cable while holding 3 back. Or it could be written as you're going to cable 6 stitches and you're going to hold half of them back so that it cables to the right. Generally, if you're working with half of the number, they're going to use back. And if you're working with the whole number, they're going to use right. So this is cable 6 stitches right leaning. And this would be hold 3 stitches to the back and create a cable. You have to read the instructions, the special stitches, on what the person writing the cable meant, because all 4 of these can mean the exact same thing. So you really need to pay attention to what it says in the instructions when they use their abbreviations, what they mean. The one thing that will always hold true, and this is very, very helpful, no matter which way you like to think about it, left or front, back or right. Whether you like to think of cables as holding it to the front, holding it to the back, or if you like to think of cables as leaning to the right, leaning to the left. No matter which way you like to think about them, the B and the R look the same, and the F and the L look the same. So if it is written with the opposite instruction of what you hold in your head, so if you always think of cables as left and right, but they use front and back, just remember the B's and the R's are the same thing, and the F's and the L's are the same thing. So that's going to make it a little easier to translate if you have problems with left and right but not front and back, or if you have problems with front and back but not left and right. Now that I have said all of that, I will show you what this looks like in practice on my little cable swatch here. So you need to remain calm. It is just knitting. It can always be taken out. It's going to be okay. There is nothing scary about cables. We have come up to my 6 cable stitches here. And I have decided that I want to make them go out because I want to do a double thing here, just like I did down here. I want to do a double. And so these go out. I need the eyeball. So this is going to go in, which means I need this first one to go left, and I need the second one to go right. So we know that that means that these stitches are going to be held in the front because the F and the L are the same thing. So I'm going to take these 3 stitches off. I'm going to hold them in the front. Now, if you had a J hook, a J type cable jump, you would put the stitches on like a fish hook. You would put them on and the whole thing would hang with both points going down, and the curve would be here. Same thing if you had the U bend, you would put those stitches in that little U and have the straight parts on either side. The grooved one would look just like this. And we're going to hold those to the front out of the way. The smaller ones, the J hook is a little easier to work with because it hangs down here out of your way. You don't have these points to deal with. So if you're a beginner and you want to do this and you feel like you need to buy one, you can also, if you have a very small stitch holder, no, that's not going to be right. If you have a very small stitch holder, that's the thing that looks like a giant safety pin, you can also use that and go in there and let that dangle down out of the way. And then I'm going to knit these 3. So that's my second 3 out of my 6. Then, make sure I don't lose those, I'm going to go back to this one and I'm going to knit those 3 stitches that I held to the front. I immediately go into my second cable, and this one I want to lean to the right. So I'm going to hold in the back because B and R is the same thing. So I'm going to take my 3 stitches off. And I'm going to put them in the back of the work. So they're held in the back out of the way. I'm going to knit these 3 in my normal fashion. 2, 3. Put those back on so I don't lose them. Bring up my cable jump. Now at this point, if you don't want to knit off the cable jump, you can just put the stitches back on your second needle and work them off your second needle. That's fine too, whichever way you're more comfortable with. Like I said, once you've gotten really practiced at these, you will actually quit using cable jumps unless it's like really fiddly yarn or really fiddly stitches. And knit those 3, and then I'm going to complete my row. So when you come back to your cable stitches, remember they're twisted and they're going to get worked. So this would be the back side, so that would be purl stitches. They're going to get worked in just normal purl stitches in the way that they lay on the needle. You don't want to do anything different with them. You just want to, because now all you've done is you've changed the order that they were on your needle. And so you'll go back and purl those in the new order that they're in. Now, if you are a tight knitter, you are going to find cables to be difficult. You really need to have control over that tension, because the tighter it is, first of all, your stitches are not going to lay and fill in correctly. Second of all, you're going to find it really hard to work with those extra needles and get stitches on and off of needles if they're super tight. Now, the nature of cable, because you ended up moving stitches around, you're going to have some spaces like here that you can actually, like, it looks like a hole. Now, if you are using a nice wool that's got just a little bit of, it's called a halo, it's got just a tiny bit of fuzz to it, your yarn's not completely smooth, slick, shiny. Those are going to fill in after you've washed it the first time. Those are going to fill in. They're not going to be noticed. That is just the nature of it, because you took those and put them back together. You've got a little bit of space behind it. That's going to be there. Don't try to take it out. Don't pull tighter or anything. Those will fill in after it's been washed. You can pick up any store-bought knitted, anything your grandma knitted. If it has cables in it, it's going to have that little tiny gap in it. That is normal. That is supposed to be there. Now, one of the things that you want to make sure that you are paying attention to when you're working cables is how many rows you're doing on between your cables, because it will be obvious later if you did too many or too few. It will end up having a long space or a squished space, and it will stick out. So the easiest way to know how many you've done is by looking at that space in the between, or in here. It would be from here to here. So this is where you crossed, and this is where I crossed again. So this is where I crossed. When it's on your needle, you can just see these 2 cords and this hole. And you want to go in and count your stitches in that hole to make sure that you're staying on track if you're not using some other form of some other method. If you're figuring this out on your own, most cables are going to be, let's say it's 6 stitches before it crosses again. You're going to want to do the same amount of rows as stitches. So unless it says otherwise, but a good rule of thumb is that if it's 6 stitches across your cable, and then it crosses here, and then it's another 6 stitches. Okay, you want to make sure that you go 6 rows after you cross before you cross again. If it was 8 stitches or 12 stitches, whatever, how many stitches it is in your cable, you need to go at least that many rows before you twist again. The other thing that I want to talk about, and make sure that you check the pattern that you're using. But generally, a pattern will say something like you're going to do your cable every 6 rows. I hate that. So what you're going to do is count. So you've twisted here, and then you have to do 6 rows. So you're going to count this as 1, and then the back side on your purl is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the next one is 1 again. And that is the easiest way to keep track, is the whatever the indicated thing is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you know if you're on the back side, you're on an even number. If you're on the front side, you're on an odd number. And whatever your thing was 1. And then you're going to count until you get to 1 again. And that is going to be what you're going to do. I always got confused on every 6 rows. Does that mean I do it and then I count 6 rows? Or do I do it and then I do it on the 6th row after I've done it? Or do I do 6 rows and then do it? Yeah, it gets confusing. So that is generally how I keep up with it. If that's not what the author intended, the designer intended, then they should have been a little more clear. But that is how I keep up with it, is that whatever the indicated design element is, if I'm supposed to do it every 4 rows, every 6 rows, every 8 rows, that is 1, purl side is 2, front side is 3, so the front sides are the odds, back sides are the evens, and I go until I have reached the end. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to start over at 1. That's going to be on the front side, and that's going to be the one that gets the design element. All right, and that wraps up cables, and I hope you like or subscribe to the video, to the channel, and maybe see you around in some of my other places. Thanks, guys. Bye.